When you stop contacting a man, the first and most profound thing that happens is that silence begins to spark awareness. It is a subtle, almost imperceptible shift at first, but it carries tremendous weight. Silence is not merely the absence of words or messages, it is a presence of self, a deliberate choice to step back, to allow space to breathe, and to reclaim the attention that was once scattered and given without thought. In that silence, he begins to notice. He notices the small things first, the laughter that no longer arrives in his inbox, the messages that remain unread because they are never sent, the calls that used to bridge the gap between distance and presence but now go unanswered. Every little absence becomes a whisper of your value, and in that whisper he begins to reflect. Reflection is a strange process. It cannot be forced, and it rarely happens when we are constantly there, offering ourselves as a lifeline. When you pull back, when you stop filling the empty spaces with your voice, your energy, your constant attention, a man is confronted with an unexpected void. At first, he may not recognize it as a void. He may feel confusion, irritation, or even frustration because humans are naturally conditioned to respond to stimulus, to react when something familiar disappears. Your silence, then, is not aggression, it is not punishment. It is the simplest, most authentic form of power you can possess. It is a mirror held up to him without a word, asking him to see himself, to see what his actions or inactions truly mean. Awareness begins in subtle recognition. He remembers the times when your voice brought comfort, when your attention was a balm in the chaos of life. He recalls conversations where he may not have truly listened. Moments where your presence was a constant that he never had to fight to keep. And now that presence is missing. The human mind resists emptiness, it seeks patterns, it craves completion, and when a pattern is interrupted, especially one that involved intimacy, connection, and familiarity, there is a natural tendency to notice, to question, and eventually to confront the reality of absence. Your silence acts as a gentle but powerful wake-up call. It does not scream for attention, it does not demand recognition. It merely exists quietly, firmly, unwaveringly, and in its existence, it compels him to become aware. Awareness is not just about missing you. It is about realizing what you brought into his life that he cannot replace. It is a confrontation with the value that had been quietly accepted as given. Many men may not understand this initially. They may take your silence as a challenge, as a test, as something to overcome with persistence or even persuasion. But awareness that is truly sparked by silence is not superficial. It goes beyond wanting your attention. It forces introspection. He begins to ask himself questions he has never asked before. Why do I feel unsettled without her presence? Why did I not appreciate the things she did for me? What did I overlook when she was always there, available and willing? Your withdrawal does not merely create longing, it creates understanding. It creates a space where reflection is unavoidable, where clarity seeps in quietly, and where he starts to recognize that your presence was not simply about being available, but about being significant. The beauty of this awareness is that it grows organically. It cannot be manufactured, and it cannot be rushed. The more consistently you maintain your silence, the deeper his consciousness of your value becomes. Every day that passes without a message, every moment that you choose yourself over the compulsion to reach out, acts as reinforcement of this truth. It is not about power for the sake of control, nor about manipulation. It is about revealing the reality of your worth in the simplest, most unassuming way. He begins to understand that you are not just another presence to fill the hours, you are a person whose attention, affection, and care are not infinitely available. And in that realization, awareness deepens into appreciation, admiration, and even reverence, though it may take time for him to articulate these feelings, even to himself. Silence also illuminates patterns that were previously invisible. When you stop contacting him, you give him the opportunity to see how he behaves in your absence, to see whether his actions match his words. It exposes inconsistency, it challenges complacency, and it brings to light the gaps between intention and execution. Your silence acts as a lens, focusing on what truly matters and what is merely habitual. He becomes aware not only of what he misses, but of what he has neglected, what he has taken for granted, and what he may have misunderstood about your boundaries, your presence, and your energy. In this way, silence is not passive. It is a catalyst for growth, a tool that sharpens perception, and a force that compels honesty without confrontation. And then there is the subtle emotional tension that arises. He feels it in small ways. The quiet unease of checking his phone, expecting a message that never comes, the hesitation in making plans because he is unsure of your response, the instinctive awareness that something has shifted. This tension is not discomfort in the ordinary sense, it is a heightened sensitivity, a way of becoming more attuned to what your presence truly means. It forces him to notice details that were once invisible, the way you smiled, the way you listened, the depth of your care, the nuance of your support. Each of these things, once unnoticed, now becomes amplified in the mind and heart of a man who is learning to be truly aware of what he has lost or what he stands to lose if he does not recognize it. When you stop contacting a man, one of the most profound effects is that distance begins to reveal his true intentions. This is a principle often overlooked because people confuse business, distractions, or temporary lapses with genuine commitment or interest. Distance has a way of stripping away excuses, revealing patterns, and exposing the authenticity of actions in a way that constant presence cannot. When you are always available, it is easy for someone to say the right words, to make empty promises, or to project an image of care and attention. But when you intentionally step back, when your energy is no longer a constant resource, the mask that hides true intentions begins to slip. Suddenly, words are no longer enough. His actions, or his lack of them, become the clearest reflection of what he really feels, what he truly values, and where his priorities lie. The first thing that distance reveals is the difference between convenience and desire. When you are always there, when your attention is readily accessible, it is easy for a man to fall into the comfort of habit. He may reach out when it suits him, respond when it benefits him, or engage when he feels like it, without ever fully committing or demonstrating authentic care. But the moment you step away, the convenience disappears, the energy he once relied on becomes unavailable, and his actions or failure to act speak louder than any words ever could. If he truly values you, distance will not deter him. It will compel him to act, to find ways to connect, to show effort that is consistent, intentional, and meaningful. Conversely, if his intentions were never genuine, if his attention was conditional or opportunistic, the absence of your constant presence quickly exposes the truth. Actions cannot be faked indefinitely when there is no immediate gain or no predictable reward. Distance also illuminates priorities. Human beings have a natural tendency to reveal their true focus when the immediacy of presence is removed, when you are not constantly contacting him. When you create space in your life for yourself, your energy, your growth, it forces him to make choices. Does he prioritize your relationship, your connection, your value? Or does he allow your absence to go unnoticed, filling the void with distractions, other engagements, or excuses? Distance removes the illusion of closeness that can exist when someone is always accessible, and it places the weight of choice squarely on him. It asks silently but insistently, who do you choose to invest in? Who deserves your effort, your attention, your emotional bandwidth? In this way, distance is not passive, it is a revealing force, an invisible test that produces clarity without confrontation. Another aspect that distance exposes is patience, or the lack of it. Genuine intention is patient and steady. When a person truly cares, they understand that absence is temporary, and they are willing to wait, to invest, and to demonstrate consistency without being prompted. When a man's patience is tested by distance, his reactions are telling. Some will respond with understanding, effort, and intentional communication, proving that their interest is not tied to convenience or immediate gratification. Others will react with indifference, irritation, or avoidance, revealing that their commitment was never as strong as it seemed. Distance, in essence, magnifies the difference between temporary desire and lasting intention, making it impossible to hide behind superficial charm or fleeting attention. Distance also brings self-reflection to the forefront, but this time, not just for you, for him as well. When a woman creates space, she gives a man the opportunity to confront his own feelings, to examine what he truly wants, and to evaluate whether his past actions align with his deeper intentions. He may suddenly recognize patterns of neglect, moments when he was careless, or times when he took your presence for granted. Without the constant reminder of your availability, he has no choice but to face the reality of his priorities, and in doing so, distance forces honesty. It is in this space that he begins to understand that words alone do not define commitment, actions do. And the way he chooses to respond in your absence becomes the clearest measure of his authenticity, far more telling than any promises or explanations he might offer while your attention was abundant and effortless. Distance also strips away distraction. In daily life, a constant flow of contact can mask true intent because attention is fragmented, obligations pile up, and the pressure to perform emotionally is diluted. But when you withdraw, the dynamic changes. He is left with the clarity of your absence, and that clarity highlights whether his interest was based on genuine connection or convenience. It creates a space where desire cannot hide behind routine, where responsibility cannot be deferred, and where true intentions must emerge. The distance does not manipulate. It merely reveals what was already present. It uncovers whether he is willing to step into the effort, whether he values your time, energy, and presence, and whether his emotions are aligned with respect, care, and long-term consideration. Finally, distance gives the gift of perspective, not just for him, but indirectly for you. It allows you to see the truth without being clouded by expectation or disappointment. You begin to notice who reaches out naturally, who engages consistently, and who quietly retreats. These observations are invaluable because they provide insight into the alignment of intentions. True interest is proactive, respectful, and resilient, while superficial attachment is reactive, inconsistent, and conditional. Distance, then, is the ultimate clarifier. It does not force decisions, it does not manipulate emotions, but it provides the environment in which true intentions are unmistakably revealed. When you stop contacting a man, one of the most fascinating and often underestimated effects is that space reignites curiosity. Curiosity is a subtle but powerful force in human psychology. It is the instinct to seek, to understand, and to explore that which is partially hidden or temporarily absent. When you are always available, always present, always responding to his messages and calls, the natural spark of curiosity can dull over time. Familiarity, even when it is comfortable, can breed predictability, and predictability in turn can breed complacency. A man may begin to assume that your attention and energy are constants, commodities that require no effort, no investment, and no genuine thought. But when you step back, when you allow space to exist between the two of you, something remarkable happens. He begins to wonder, to notice, to question, and ultimately to explore the nuances of your absence. This curiosity is not superficial. It is not merely a fleeting thought or passing intrigue. It is a deeper, instinctive pull to understand what has changed, to examine why your presence is no longer guaranteed, and to evaluate the patterns of connection that he may have overlooked before. Humans are naturally drawn to what is mysterious, to what requires effort or attention to obtain. When you withdraw, you create an absence that acts like a magnet. It does not shout for attention, but it invites it. He begins to notice the little things, the way your laughter sounded in conversation, the unique insights you shared, the way your presence once added a subtle yet irreplaceable energy to his life. These are details he may have overlooked when they were always available, but now, in their absence, they become the focus of his mind and the spark of his curiosity. Curiosity is amplified because distance creates a void that the mind instinctively seeks to fill. When a person is familiar with a consistent pattern, they may stop consciously evaluating it. They take presence for granted because it has been predictable, almost automatic. But when the pattern is broken, when messages go unanswered because they were never sent, when calls are not returned because they were never made, the void triggers a process of inquiry. He asks himself questions, sometimes unconsciously. Where is she? What is she doing? Why hasn't she reached out? What has changed? The act of asking these questions is the first step in reigniting curiosity because it forces him to confront your significance in a way that constant presence never did. Silence and space are not just passive tools, they are catalysts that provoke reflection, awareness, and a renewed desire to understand. Space also encourages imagination, which is one of the most potent components of curiosity. When someone is no longer immediately accessible, the mind begins to fill in the blanks. He imagines your thoughts, your actions, your emotions, and the life you are living outside of his awareness. This mental exploration often leads to a heightened perception of your uniqueness. He begins to recognize qualities he may have taken for granted, attributes that were invisible in the everyday flow of constant interaction. Space transforms the ordinary into something remarkable, simply because it forces him to consider aspects of you that were previously unnoticed. The more space you allow, the more he is compelled to explore these dimensions of who you are. And in that exploration, curiosity becomes not just natural but unavoidable. Another subtle effect of space is that it amplifies contrast. When you withdraw, the difference between presence and absence becomes stark. He begins to notice not only what is missing, but also what he had subconsciously associated with your availability. Your energy, your attention, your support, and your voice, all the elements that once felt ordinary suddenly gain weight, significance, and meaning. Curiosity is reignited because he is now confronted with a puzzle: how to reconcile his previous disregard or lack of awareness with the reality of your absence. This cognitive tension drives him to pay attention, to analyze, and to engage in a way that was not necessary when your attention flowed freely. Distance, in this sense, is a magnifying lens, highlighting details and emotions that were once muted by familiarity. Space also allows for mystery to return to the relationship. Mystery is a critical factor in human attraction, and it is often unintentionally lost in relationships where one person is always accessible. By stepping back, you create a natural boundary that encourages him to explore your motivations, your choices, and your life outside of his immediate knowledge. This exploration is fueled not by manipulation, but by the natural human desire to seek understanding. The absence of constant contact transforms you from a predictable presence into a compelling enigma, and curiosity thrives in that dynamic. The questions he asks himself about you, why you are distant, what you are thinking, how your life unfolds without his constant input, shift his attention from routine interaction to genuine reflection and desire to know you more deeply. Furthermore, space encourages emotional investment. When curiosity is triggered, it often leads to action, reflection, or communication driven not by obligation but by genuine interest. The mind begins to associate your absence with value, and the effort required to reconnect becomes meaningful. Actions that were previously automatic, sending a message, initiating contact, making plans, now carry weight because they are a conscious choice rather than a habitual reaction. Curiosity and desire intertwine, creating a dynamic where he is drawn to understand, to reconnect, and to engage with you in a deeper, more intentional way. Space, therefore, is not emptiness. It is a fertile ground for emotional awakening, awareness, and renewed engagement. When you stop contacting a man, one of the most profound effects that quietly unfolds is the strengthening of emotional attachment. This phenomenon is subtle, psychological, and often misunderstood because emotional attachment is not always a linear process that mirrors attention or presence. In fact, it often grows most powerfully in the absence of constant contact. When you are always available, always reaching out, always affirming your presence, emotional attachment can paradoxically stagnate. The mind and heart may take your energy for granted, assuming it is infinite and unchanging. But when you consciously step back, when you allow silence and distance to exist, the emotional threads that connect him to you begin to weave themselves more intricately, more persistently, and with greater intensity than ever before. This strengthening of attachment begins with the mind's natural response to absence. Humans are wired to notice what is missing, to seek connection when it is interrupted, and to assign value to what is no longer easily accessible. When you withdraw, the everyday patterns of interaction are disrupted, creating a space where reflection, awareness, and longing can emerge. He may initially feel discomfort, confusion, or even frustration, but these are the early sparks of emotional attachment being reforged. The mind starts replaying moments of shared laughter, deep conversations, subtle gestures of care, and experiences that were once taken for granted. Each memory gains weight because it is now contrasted with the emptiness of your absence, and the emotional resonance of those memories grows stronger. What was once ordinary becomes extraordinary in the mind of a man who realizes that your presence is not guaranteed. And in that realization, attachment quietly deepens. The next layer of this process is psychological dependence, not in the sense of unhealthy obsession, but in the natural way the mind associates comfort, emotional energy, and fulfillment with a person who once consistently provided it. Your absence triggers a subtle form of craving, a desire for the emotional balance and connection that only you provide. Because you are no longer immediately accessible, he begins to invest energy, attention, and thought into imagining your presence, anticipating your responses, and recalling your impact. Emotional attachment strengthens because it thrives in the tension between what is desired and what is unavailable. The more he notices the gap between your past availability and your current absence, the more deeply he registers your value, and the more naturally he becomes drawn into the process of emotional reflection and internal engagement. Distance also amplifies the mind's need for resolution. Humans are wired to seek closure, clarity, and understanding in their emotional experiences. When you pull back, it creates an unresolved tension, a subtle puzzle that the mind cannot ignore. He is faced with questions about why you have withdrawn, what your intentions are, and whether he has misjudged his actions or missed opportunities to nurture the connection. These questions lead to repeated mental engagement, where he reviews past interactions, analyzes his behavior, and imagines potential ways to reconnect. Each cycle of thought reinforces the emotional bond because attachment is strengthened not only by presence, but by cognitive and emotional investment. In the absence of contact, his mind works actively to fill the void, and in that process, his feelings deepen, his awareness sharpens, and the significance of your presence becomes increasingly clear. Another dimension of strengthened emotional attachment is the rekindling of desire through autonomy. When you stop contacting him, you signal self-respect, self-reliance, and emotional independence, qualities that naturally draw admiration, fascination, and attachment. He begins to see you as a person with a life, priorities, and boundaries outside of his immediate influence. This shift from availability to autonomy challenges him to engage with you more thoughtfully and intentionally. Emotional attachment grows because desire is intimately tied to respect and recognition. The more he perceives your independence, the more he values the connection you share, and the more he emotionally invests in understanding, reconnecting, and honoring that bond. Your absence is not a withdrawal of care, it is a recalibration of value, and the mind responds by heightening emotional sensitivity and attachment. Attachment is further strengthened by the process of longing. Longing is a powerful emotional force that can only exist in the presence of absence. It is the heart's recognition of significance when the familiar is no longer guaranteed, and it operates quietly but persistently in the subconscious. He may notice your absence in mundane details, the laughter that once accompanied his day, the encouragement that used to steady his mind, the warmth of your voice or energy that now lingers only in memory. Each recognition of absence generates an emotional pull, a desire to reconnect, to bridge the distance, and to restore the sense of wholeness that was once facilitated by your presence. Longing deepens attachment because it transforms passive memory into active emotional engagement, compelling him to think, feel, and reflect in ways that he did not while your presence was constant. Finally, emotional attachment is strengthened because absence creates clarity. When you stop contacting a man, his reactions or lack thereof become revealing. He must confront the reality of his feelings without the distractions of habitual interaction. He begins to see where his emotions truly lie, what he is willing to invest in, and how he values your presence. Each day of silence, each moment of deliberate space, allows his emotional connection to mature, evolve, and solidify. Attachment grows not because you chase, persuade, or remind him of your worth, but because you allow space for him to recognize, appreciate, and desire the depth of what you represent. In this way, emotional attachment becomes more genuine, more resilient, and more profound. When you stop contacting a man, one of the most transformative effects that emerges is that your self-worth becomes evident not only to him, but also to yourself. Self-worth is not simply a feeling, it is a standard, a boundary, and a quiet declaration of value. When you constantly reach out, respond immediately, or bend your presence to fit his schedule, it can unintentionally mask the depth of your intrinsic worth. Your energy, attention, and affection may be abundant, but without discernment, they risk being perceived as endless, expected, or even taken for granted. By choosing silence and creating space, you are making an unspoken but unmistakable statement. Your presence is precious, your time is valuable, and your attention is not a commodity to be earned casually. This revelation is both a gift to yourself and a mirror for him, reflecting the true measure of who you are. Your self-worth becomes evident through the boundaries you set. Boundaries are the silent language of respect. They communicate what you will accept, what you will not, and what you consider essential in the way others engage with you. When you stop contacting a man, you are not withdrawing out of pettiness or manipulation. You are affirming the value of your own time, energy, and emotional investment. This clarity forces him to confront his behavior, his intentions, and his appreciation for the person you are. If he truly respects you, he will recognize your boundaries, not as obstacles, but as indicators of your integrity and strength. In this way, your self-worth is expressed not through words, but through the quiet, unwavering act of honoring yourself. Silence, when paired with self-respect, is profoundly revealing. When you step back, you stop validating actions that may have been inconsistent, neglectful, or casual. You no longer fill the gaps left by his absence with your own energy or attention. Instead, you let those gaps exist, and in doing so, you allow the reality of his engagement, or lack of it, to surface. A man begins to see not only what he is losing, but also the standard you hold for yourself. He becomes aware that your presence is not guaranteed, that your care is not automatic, and that your emotional availability is tied to genuine respect and mutual consideration. This awareness is crucial because it draws the contrast between those who take you for granted and those who genuinely value you, and in that contrast, your self-worth shines unmistakably. Your self-worth also becomes evident because distance allows your character and values to stand on their own. When you are always present, constantly reaching out, or perpetually affirming your care, it is easy for your value to be overshadowed by accessibility. Constant presence can blur the distinction between genuine worth and mere convenience. But when you step back, your qualities, your intelligence, your kindness, your integrity, and your emotional depth stand independently. They are no longer hidden behind the noise of habitual communication. He begins to recognize the true essence of who you are because he must consciously consider the impact of your absence. Your worth becomes visible not through persuasion, manipulation, or verbal assertion, but through the natural recognition that emerges when your energy is consciously held in reserve. The power of self-worth in this context also lies in the redefinition of dynamics. When you stop contacting him, you are no longer operating from a place of dependency, need, or expectation. You are choosing yourself first, prioritizing your growth, happiness, and emotional equilibrium. This shift is transformative because it alters the balance of energy between you. Instead of being the constant pursuer, the one who validates, or the one who sacrifices attention for approval, you become a presence defined by choice, not compulsion. This recalibration forces him to confront the reality of his actions, his intentions, and his desire to engage with someone who honors themselves. Your self-worth becomes not only evident but magnetic. It draws attention precisely because it is authentic, unwavering, and unapologetic. Another layer of this phenomenon is the internal realization of your own value. By stepping back, you are forced to evaluate your needs, desires, and priorities without the distraction of constant engagement. You discover that your happiness, fulfillment, and emotional stability do not depend on his validation or presence. This self-realization is quietly powerful. It radiates outward, influencing the way he perceives you. Confidence that stems from genuine self-respect is unmistakable. It cannot be faked or fabricated because it is grounded in awareness and integrity. The more you honor yourself, the clearer your value becomes, and the more he cannot ignore it. Your self-worth also communicates an unspoken standard for the relationship. It teaches him that care, attention, and respect are not automatic rights to be taken lightly. By withholding constant contact, you are demonstrating that meaningful engagement is earned through consistent effort, genuine interest, and alignment with your values. This is not about playing games or creating scarcity artificially. It is about showing the reality of mutual respect and setting the tone for the level of connection you expect. In witnessing your self-respect, he begins to understand the depth of your worth, not just in theory, but in practice. And this recognition subtly reshapes his behavior and perception over time. Finally, your self-worth becomes evident because it forces clarity. Distance creates space not only for observation but for discernment. He sees who you are without the constant reinforcement of presence, and he sees what you expect without the interference of habitual attention. In this space, your intrinsic value, your principles, your character, your boundaries, and your energy shines clearly. The recognition that you are someone who honors themselves awakens awareness, respect, and in many cases desire, and it sets the foundation for relationships that are based on genuine appreciation rather than convenience. When you stop contacting a man, one of the most powerful outcomes is that clarity in the relationship emerges. This clarity is rarely immediate or obvious at first. because the mind and emotions are often clouded by habit, expectation, or the comfort of familiar patterns. When you are constantly present, always initiating, responding, or providing emotional energy, it can be difficult to see the true state of a connection. Familiarity creates a veil. Constant engagement can obscure inconsistency, mask disinterest, and soften the perception of neglect. But when you withdraw, when you allow silence and distance to exist, the reality of the relationship comes into sharper focus. The patterns, priorities, and intentions that were once hidden behind habitual contact are now illuminated with a clarity that cannot be ignored. Clarity emerges first through observation of actions versus words. In any connection, it is easy for someone to offer promises, explanations, or verbal reassurances that may not align with their true intentions. When you are always available, these words are rarely tested because your presence fills the gaps regardless of consistency or effort. But in the absence of constant contact, the truth becomes unavoidable. Does he reach out of his own volition? Does he show genuine effort, interest, and care? Or does he remain passive, indifferent, or distracted? The disparity between what he says and what he does becomes starkly visible. His behavior, unprompted and unmediated by your presence, reveals the reality of his investment in the relationship, and in this revelation, clarity begins to form. Distance also exposes priorities. When you stop contacting him, you no longer participate in maintaining the illusion of engagement. He must confront the choices he makes in your absence. Does he prioritize connecting with you, making time, and demonstrating care? Or does he allow the void to persist without action? This observation removes the filter of habitual interaction and forces him and you to see where the relationship truly stands. Priorities are not constructed in the moments of attention. They are revealed in the moments of absence when the presence of one person is no longer guaranteed. Clarity emerges because actions or their absence cannot be denied, and patterns that were previously hidden become undeniable. Another way clarity manifests is through emotional transparency. Relationships can often contain unspoken assumptions, emotional inconsistencies, and subtle manipulations that are difficult to identify when communication is constant. When you withdraw, the emotional landscape becomes less cluttered. Feelings, intentions, and attachments are revealed through responses or the lack of them. A man may suddenly recognize the weight of his feelings, the depth of his care, or the consequences of neglect simply because he is confronted with the quiet truth of your absence. Conversely, a lack of consistent emotional response may reveal disinterest or misalignment. Distance acts as a lens, magnifying the subtle truths of emotional engagement and allowing clarity to emerge organically. Clarity also arises through the lens of self-reflection. When you stop initiating contact, you remove the habitual crutches that often obscure the state of a relationship. You create space for both parties to assess their desires, motivations, and boundaries. He begins to see what he truly values about you and the connection, while you gain insight into how he aligns or does not align with your expectations and standards. The silence you create serves as a mirror, reflecting the reality of commitment, care, and intention. In this mirror, there is no room for excuses, rationalizations, or distraction. Clarity shines precisely because there is no interference from habitual engagement or constant reassurance. Another dimension of clarity is the revelation of compatibility and alignment. Many relationships survive on inertia, on routine, or on the comfort of familiarity rather than genuine connection or mutual understanding. When you step back, the substance of the relationship is tested. Differences in priorities, values, or emotional investment become more apparent because there is no longer constant interaction to mask them. The clarity that emerges is not always comfortable because it exposes truth rather than illusion. It reveals whether the connection is built on mutual effort, respect, and intention, or whether it exists primarily because of habit, convenience, or emotional reliance. Space also forces accountability. When you are no longer reaching out, a man must confront his own behavior without the safety net of your energy sustaining the connection. Every choice he makes, every effort he does or does not make, becomes a reflection of his true intentions. In the absence of your habitual engagement, there is no deflection, no distraction, no immediate reassurance to obscure reality. This accountability is crucial because it forces both clarity and alignment. Patterns that may have gone unnoticed for months or even years are suddenly visible. His willingness or reluctance to invest effort becomes undeniable, and you can see the relationship for what it truly is rather than what you hoped or imagined it to be. Finally, clarity is reinforced by the emotional and cognitive space you create. Without constant contact, your mind and heart are freed from the fog of habitual engagement. You gain perspective, insight, and objectivity that are difficult to achieve when you are enmeshed in daily communication. This clarity allows you to see not only his intentions, but also your own boundaries, desires, and non-negotiables. The relationship can no longer exist in a state of ambiguity. Absence demands honesty, observation, and reflection. And in this environment, the true nature of the connection is illuminated in a way that is both undeniable and instructive.